It's time to talk about snakes. Time to talk about snakes named Hiss. And I mean this guy, King Hiss, the Masters of the Universe leader of the Snake Men. My name is Scott ToyGuru Neitlich. I was the brand manager for Masters of the Universe Classics, and this is the director's commentary for Masters of the Universe Classics, going character by character. We're up to King Hiss. So let's talk about King Hiss. So Hiss was created in the mid-'80s as a third faction of evil. Because, you always need a new bad guy, right? I mean, you can't just settle for Dr. Octopus. You also have to have Electro. Or Joker has to also have Penguin and Catwoman. There's got to be a whole, faction of villains out there. And the more factions out there, the better. So in the mid-'80s, Tim Kilpin, who was the marketing manager, started off as the copywriter, created the Snake Men with the idea. He actually even wrote in the memo, even Indiana Jones is afraid of snakes. Snakes would be a great theme for a He-Man villain. And that's really where they came from, was the idea, let's just create a new faction, and what could the theme of that faction be? Snake Men even poured into the good guys, with Man-at-Arms eventually becoming a Snake Man permanently in the 2000X series, but that's a whole video for another time. Let's talk about King Hiss specifically, who was the leader of the Snake Men. So when he was created, he was done so within the aquarium of the fact that all of the Snake Men were created at once. It was sort of a mass birth of characters. It wasn't like King Hiss came along and then Rattler and then Snakeface, who was originally called Medusa Man. All of the Snake Men were created by Tim Kilpin in the mid-'80s all at once, although Cobra Khan was kind of drafted into them since he was a previous Snake character. The original toy and the original version of King Hiss didn't quite work the way the engineers wanted it to. They wanted like a magical reveal of the snake form. And his human form, while it works very easily for toys and has been done, in a few different toys over the years, the snake form proved to be a little difficult. So there was a lot of settling, and some of that does spill into how he was translated into the Classics figure. So let's kind of get into that and talk about how one relates to the other. So when we did the Classics figure, we actually did the two different forms as two completely different torsos, where he had a human torso, if you will, a disguised torso, and he had a snake torso that clicked on. In the vintage line, the action feature allowed King Hiss to sort of shed his skin, and the snake torso would be underneath. And there were quite a few designs created, but in the end, the only one that functionally would work was a shell that would split. So there were two halves of his torso, and you would simply pull them apart to reveal the snakes. I will say the designers who I did get a chance to work with, who were still at Mattel, mentioned they were very disappointed in this because they really wanted kind of more of a magical snake reveal coming out of the arms and head. But this was kind of like the settled on version with instructions on the back. He was also supposed to be a friend of He-Man who then revealed his snaky form. That was kind of like the trick. He started off as a good guy, if you will, and the idea was He-Man was supposed to go up to him and say like, "Hey, how you doing, fellow heroic warrior?" And then suddenly the snakes come out, and it's like, whoa. But while that concept was prominent on the artwork on the back of the vintage figure, it kind of didn't bleed over past that, especially into the mini comics and such. But when we did King Hiss for the Classics line, we wanted to look at sort of all the incarnations of him over the years. So we looked at the vintage version and how it functionally worked, again, along with all of his cohorts, the fellow Snake Men. And how would you're supposed to think he was a good guy if he had that snake on his chest on the armor? I never understood that. Doesn't that give it away? And as we translated more and more Snake Men into Classics, we wanted to, create a unified faction and a unified look. So again, looking at all of his appearances, such as when he made his big debut in the mini comics and arose from kind of a snake pit cauldron there. Beautiful art by Bruce Timm, by the way. It's amazing to think that Bruce Timm of Batman the Animated Series fame started off by drawing Masters of the Universe mini comics. It's amazing the number of talented people that have worked on this brand over the years. And King Hiss, in the mini comics would even sometimes team up with Skeletor while at the same time, plotting to overthrow him. And it was later revealed that King Hiss was also an enemy back in the day, back in Preternia, where he rode around on robotic dinosaurs. And hey, more robotic dinosaurs is cool. King Hiss, though, in the Snake Man did not really appear in Filmation. Cobra Khan snuck into it, since he was an earlier figure who was then kind of retconned into the Snake Man, especially in 2000X. I think 2000X actually made him a descendant of the Snake Man, like he wasn't a true Snake Man. That's why Rattler and, would make fun of him and stuff, because he was like, you're not a real Snake Man. But when the 2000X series did come along, the Snake Man got a major boost in both screen time and viciousness. They became the theme of Year 2. So Year 2 got a new package refresh, and the animated series got a refresh, even a title refresh, becoming Masters of the Universe versus the Snake Man. And this was the first time we got the Snake Man in animated form. Again, minus Cobra Khan, who showed up in a few Filmation episodes, but not as a Snake Man, just as a Skeletor flunky. And Cobra Khan also, again, now he's a full Snake Man. I mean, he was a descendant of them, but he was now on their team. He left Skeletor's team and joined his fellow brethren, reptiles. And King Hiss not only got a major makeover visually, but he also got a sort of makeover as far as, I guess you could say, viciousness. When he would turn into his snake form, and it wasn't just like the two halves popping open like the vintage toy. He would actually eat people. Like, he ate several people on screen. He almost ate Skeletor and Evil Lyn. So yeah, he was a badass. He really became a threat, and that was the whole idea, because the more threatening the villain, the more heroic the hero. It's kind of a formula that really works. If you have a wimpy villain, who cares about the hero? He's just going to, kick him. They also revealed in the 2000X series that Snake Mountain, which makes sense, was the former home of the Snake Man. And I thought that was just absolutely genius and so obvious. Like, wow, that Skeletor sort of took over this old mountain that used to be the Snake Man mountain, which eventually was revealed to be a frozen snake god, but that's a story for another time. So, looking at the vintage King Hiss and the way he was designed, there were a few approaches to take when translating him and updating him, both for 2000X and then eventually Classics. 2000X took more of the green armor version, but didn't really make the whole idea that he was supposed to be like a heroic warrior in disguise. They sort of threw that out and just made him a Snake King, complete with a crown that was very kind of Egypt-esque. There was a lot of Egypt going on with the sorceress and all sorts of characters, lots of influence with that. And then again, when he turns into a snake form, it's not just popping open the front and back, but the snake's just kind of he literally morphs into this huge pile of snake. And while King Hiss did show up in the 2000X toy line, personally, I will say I was a little disappointed with the toy, because that mass of snakes was much more done executionally like the vintage toy, with a snap-on head and torso and arm, as opposed to having a giant withering mass of snakes, which could really only be done with two torsos. And we did eventually get to doing a 2000X version of King Hiss, which I'm so glad we did, because this character deserved a figure so much. That's kind of we'll save that story for another time, about the trials and tribulations getting to that figure. Let's back up, though, to the original King Hiss release in Classics, which was the one we're supposed to be talking about, background of character aside. So as I noted, to pull off the snake effect, we just did two complete different torsos. You pulled one off at the waist and snapped the other one on. It made the most sense. One issue that did come up with King Hiss was the naming. So this happened throughout the line, and I've done a whole video on character naming and how it works, especially with modern copyrights. So sometimes names like Ninjor, in this case, got used by another toy line, Power Rangers, so we had to call him Ninja Warrior. With the case of King Hiss, that was owned by Hasbro for their G.I. Joe line. They had still renewed the copyright, even though the Hiss tank hadn't come out for a while. And I'm not sure how we were able to get away with Hiss with just the 4 S's, because usually if you spell something differently, it's still part of the original copyright, but somehow maybe having the word King in front of it was enough of a differentiation. It has to be reviewed by legal boards, and those are not the toy companies, that's the government. Either way, we got permission to spell the name that way, and that's why there's no I in Classics King Hiss. Instead, there's 4 S's and with a king in front of it. So that was the legally approved way of doing his name. You'll also notice he's noted as House Viper on his bio, and that was part of a larger story that there were going to be different snake clans on different planets, like Lady Slither's clan. When the Horsemen were doing the second torso, the snake torso, if you will, that you can see just snaps on to the bottom half, you just pull it apart by the waist, I actually thought in my mind we were going to be getting something more like this. I thought they were going to take influence from the 2000X series and do a mass of writhing snakes. Eventually we did get to do a mass of writhing? Am I saying that right? Wiggling snakes? But it took a couple more years before we got that. The approach they actually take, which I totally get why they did, was to really mold it after the vintage toy because, well, that was the whole point. Was Classics was an update of the vintage figures. And another reason I'm glad we got to the full 2000X version of him, because that was a good portal to do the giant, snake writhing effect. And how this figure was eventually released, that's a story into itself, and honestly was a hot mess. It happened after I left Mattel because the new team didn't quite follow the plans left behind. But they did find ways to at least give you different parts that you can mix and match and give King Hiss slightly different looks. So, hey, bravo for that, and at least we got it in the end. How it was delivered wasn't exactly as promised, but it came together, and mistakes happen all the time. In fact, speaking of those, let's talk about the one I was involved with, which was, once again, we had a shoulder issue. The shoulders on King Hiss were swapped from the way the Horseman designed it. And there were ways to correct it. There were whole videos and websites that sort of figured out ways you could make it correct. The reason this happened was this was the figure that was designed as we switched over between 2 different designers. So one designer started it, and then another designer finished it. Every year or 2 years, the design team would switch between people. You can see the Team Maddie video for a look at that, of all the different people who worked on it. And you can see a comparison to Drago Man, who used the same shoulder correctly. So basically it slipped through the cracks as teams switched over. As one designer started on the project and another took over and finished it, sort of each thought the other one took a look at the shoulders. Our way of trying to make this up to the fans was to take a cue from Hot Wheels, which does something called the apology car. Whenever a mistake is made in their online club, the Red Line Club, they tend to send out a free car and a letter apologizing to fans, and that's basically what we did. We sent everyone a free figure, for the most part Merman, and we were very sorry. And I mean, it wasn't meant to happen, especially because we have that whole issue with Roboto that had happened a few months earlier where we swore this would never happen again, and then it happened again. Believe me, I lost a lot of sleep over that one. But he still turned out great. And again, the Horseman just nailing that mug. I mean, that face, that smirk is just like evil and cunning. I love it. King Hssss is an awesome figure, and it's great to have started a new faction to begun the Snake Men in Classics. And we got to all of them in the end. And it was great because you could really build up your bad guys and your armies, and hey, the Classics toy line was really hitting a new stride.